the direction we took was I think the correct one. As soon as I hit the new engine, I start to make good lap times. So I'm so excited. I mean, still is a lot of things to improve. Just in 10 laps I did, I get really good feeling. So the feedback was really good. I'm so happy that Yamaha was so good. Still we have some engines to try, but I feel good on the bike.
Thanks for talking to us, Maverick.
Thank you. No problem.
Sounds like Christmas has come early then for Maverick Vinales. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on that social media question that Matt just fired at you as well, Simon? While we've got you,
I apologise. You're going to have to repeat it because I was talking to Maverick, asking him if he would speak to us. So could you repeat that?
Tony Alexander wants to know, what do the teams prevent by warming up the bikes, and how exactly do they warm them up? I think it means you can say both sort of in the warm-up session on Sundays, but also when they just bring them out to pit lane in the mornings and the mechanics of revving them and whatnot.
Well, it doesn't matter what machine that it is, you have to. I mean, I run standard GSXR 1000s at a track day, and I'm really strict with all the guys that are using them, that they get idle and up to running temperature, because and we do that like sort of half an hour before we're going to even start it to go out, because they've got big pieces in there that take a while to get warm, like the big crankshafts in there and other shafts, and yeah, the thing is, when you warm them, things heat up and expand, and if things are at different sizes, then you can do damage, you know, revving them hard with parts in there that are still cold. So, and these machines are built to a lot closer tolerances, so everything is, you know, as perfect as possible, where a production machine can be manufactured a little bit looser to put up with more abuse, you know. So these things here are so expensive. They'll go even to the trouble of, I've seen heated fans blowing on the sumps to get the oil to a temperature that when they first start it to warm it up, it's not so cold, you know. So yeah, and I'm sure that they've got more technical things than that we can't see, you know, to heat them, warm them. But yeah, I hope that gives a rough idea.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Simon. Well, Tony, I hope that answers your question. If you're listening in, we're going to switch it up a little bit. Firu has, or Tiru, depending on, I guess, the pronunciation, written in asking, do all factories have European test teams? Now, of course, here today we got with us Bradley Smith, Michele Piro's here, and also you got Jonas Folger making his sort of first outing with all these guys with Yamaha. And, well, which other teams, they all do have European test teams to a certain extent, don't they?
yeah, they do, Matt. Yeah, and that was one of the big reasons why Maverick Vinales and Valentino Rossi wanted Yamaha to step up their game in that department. Of course, they've now got Jonas Folger out there circulating on a Wisdar M1. He's going to be busy now behind the scenes working tirelessly to try and improve that Yamaha. As you rightly point out, Ducati have always had the ultra-reliable Michele Piro. KTM, they've got Mika Kallio and Danny Pedrosa with them next year. Aprilia, of course, have stepped up their game. They've had test riders before, but certainly nobody of the ilk of Bradley Smith and his speed and talent. HRC, well, of course, they've got Stefan Bradl. He's European based, so they can test in Europe whenever they want to with him. Suzuki likewise with Sylvain Gintoli. And of course this rumour that keeps persisting about whether Casey Stoner will be brought back into the HRC fold somewhat surprisingly next year as a test rider. So yeah, they've now all got effectively test teams that they can utilise both in their native countries, Europe or Japan, Italy or Japan or Austria, and they've got European test riders as well. So it's a fully fledged effort for everybody on the grid now, and you cannot afford not to have a European test team. You have to be out there putting in the crucial miles with top-level fast riders. Otherwise, you are left behind the game.
Yeah, absolutely. No, well, I hope that answers your question. On that sort of note, we'll pick up on this question from Yassine, who asks, what do you think will be the bigger loss for Ducati after this year? It's been, well, obviously Lorenzo's gone to Honda now, but also announced lately, as you said, Stoner and Ducati have parted company. How much will be this a big loss in terms of their development of the bike, perhaps aerodynamically or turning? Do you think?
Are we talking about what's the bigger loss between riders?
Yeah. I think that's the gist of what they're asking, yeah.
In my opinion, I mean, Casey Stoner is one of the greatest riders of all time, and there aren't many that come close. Marc Marquez, obviously, but for me, Jorge Lorenzo is a current rider. Ducati losing a 5-time world champion. For me, I think that's the bigger loss of the two.
I think it's pretty careless to lose the both of them in the space of about 3 or 4 months' time. You know, you've lost 2 of the fastest and best riders, the most successful rides in the history. I totally agree with Steve. You know, Hoy Lorenzo this year showed that once he got his head around the Ducati, once they gave him what he wanted in Mugello, he was pretty much invincible for a couple of races. He was going to be fighting for victories throughout this season, and were it not be for those injuries. You know, Casey Stoner, because he had his own injury problems this year, he only tested for Ducati once this year. So very, very limited contribution that Casey was able to make to the project this year. So losing Lorenzo, we mentioned earlier on, it has seriously weakened Ducati and seriously strengthened HRC with his move over there. So, but yeah, you could argue that how on earth did Ducati get into a situation where they lost Casey Stoner and Hoy Lorenzo in the same calendar year?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I hope that answers your question there, Yassine. Actually, well, that leads on to another question from Scott, talking about calendar years. He says, why do riders' contracts follow a calendar year instead of aligning with the start and the end of the season, per se?
That's a good question. I don't know the official answer to that. I don't know if you do, Matt. I've never understood it. I understand it from a marketing point of view, which is, I suppose, what it's mainly down to, is it, Matt?
Yeah, I think they tried to change some of the system whereby your contracts were basically starting from January the 1st and they ended immediately after the final Grand Prix. But I think it's just normal and easy where your contracts from January the 1st to December the 31st. Sometimes you do wonder why that happens, because once this test comes along, Hoy Lorenzo now is useless for Ducati. They're not going to use him in any kind of marketing campaigns. They're not going to get him to come to the NEC show in England that's currently going on right now, Motorcycle Live, in his Ducati uniform. So sometimes I guess it's just tradition, maybe it's just easier, but I know that a lot of teams and riders, they sort of said, you know, these contracts need to be written whereby it ends the day after whatever the final Grand Prix is. So then these guys can go and move over to their respective new teams. But, you know, like I said, if Hoy Lorenzo's contract with Ducati now runs to December the 31st, then really what's the point? Because in everybody's eyes, he's now a HRC rider.
Yeah. There was some debate in the media centre yesterday when the rain came along about what if we race on Monday, what would happen then? Go ahead, Simon.
Yes, guys, you know how I was chatting to you a little earlier about, I was being rather rude about the satellite Hondas. Rather than have my opinion on it, I've just bumped into someone in the pit lane who is the crew chief for Nicky Hayden when he won here at Valencia, that World Championship, and he'll know a lot more than me about the different specs of Hondas. Pete Benson, can you give us an idea on what the differences are? Because a lot of people think that they're Mark's old bikes from the year before or 2 years ago, and it sure doesn't look like that to me.
I think that's basically true that they are, but the problem is that the bikes have moved on so much in the last couple of years, especially this year. The Honda looks so much better. It's got top speed back. It looks really controllable, whereas the old one, the engine was not anywhere near what they've got this year. So, I think it is true that they are the old bikes, but they're the old bikes with old spec electronics and all this kind of thing, and they've not kept up with anywhere near the factory bikes, and they're just really, really hard for the guys to ride.
So when you say old spec electronics, they don't have what Mark used on those bikes, or they do? So exactly as Mark rode them, or not?
I don't really know for sure, but I believe it's not exactly the same. And obviously this year's electronics is for a completely different engine, so it won't suit anyway.
Hey Pete, while we've got you on the line, can you give us an idea what, as a crew chief, these tests, how do you handle them? Like, how do you make up a test schedule and to get through as many things as you can in the time you've got?
It depends a lot on what you got to test. If you come here with the factory obviously have parts and stuff that that you got to do. You got to look at how many hours, how many laps you can do in a day without the rider being completely exhausted and giving it, because as they get fatigued by the end of the second or third day, the information's not as good. So you just got to look at the priority, figure out what's the most important thing for you, what's your biggest problem or what you need to improve the most. You start there, you prioritise, and then you work your way back down through the list and normally drop half a dozen things off the end because you can't do 500 laps in 2 days.
I remember as a rider, you'd go out and ride a whole day, and at the end of the day with a good new set of tyres in, the time you could do, you had a certain time you could do. The next morning with a fresh mind, I'd go a second faster just because your mind's more on it the next day. That was at Phillip Island.